In the hush of a rainy dawn, a man returns to the ridge where he proposed to his late wife. At his heel, Buddy, a German shepherd, halts. He's found a hidden cliffside cabin. Inside, Mary's things, a yellowed scarf, blue-scented notes, folders of records, whisper this was her secret investigation space. If the mine's safety gear was marked paid, where did it go when workers were hurt? Why did Mary hide a scent trail in a scarf? And what do the 3 blue knots point to? Can a dog lead a husband, grieving for 5 years, back to the truth his wife began? Before we start, tell me where you're watching from. Drop your country in the comments and subscribe for the full story. Rain softened the ridge to gray lines, cool air carrying wet bark and stone. The light was even, the kind that makes a man hear his own breath. Mike Johnson stood on the porch and decided not to run today. 47, 6 feet even, broad through the shoulders from army years. He wore a pale nick through his right eyebrow, an iron at the temples that hadn't been there when Mary was alive. People in Ridgewood called him steady because they saw the stacked firewood and the fixed steps, not the silence afterward. Grief had shrunk into a constant undertow over 5 years, but it still turned every decision into drag. He had planned to list the farmhouse, pack the attic, and drive east until memory felt thinner. Plans are easy until you touch the things. At his left knee leaned the reason he hadn't drifted off the map. Buddy, an 8-year-old German shepherd, sable coat with a blue-black saddle, tall ears reading weather, tea-brown eyes that stayed on Mike's face as if truth lived there. He'd been a search and rescue dog, trained to find the lost and keep looking when people quit. There was frost on his muzzle and a stiffness in cold mornings, but when he heard seek his body lined up like a compass on north. The week after Mary's funeral, he'd slept with one paw on Mike's boot. Some nights, he still did. Attic, Mike said, and climbed. The ladder sighed. The space was low and honest, boards darkened by summers, a single dormer spilling a square of cool light, dust and cedar and cardboard. Mary's handwriting still lived on the boxes, teacher-neat labels that made orders sound kind. Winter scarves, plates, don't stack, Mike's books, keep. She used to say handwriting was the face your thoughts wore when you weren't in the room. He touched the underline on keep and felt the throat-tight click he'd learned not to fight. 3 piles, he told himself. Keep, donate, sell. Do not drift. Buddy quartered the knee wall, tail low in the thinking way, nose moving like a reader across a line of text. Then he stopped, ears up, head tipped a degree. Stillness running down his back. Mike knew the posture from floods and rock slides. Something here. He knelt. The boards matched until one didn't. A finish nail sat just shy of flush and looked too clean for this much dust. He eased a pocket knife under the edge. The plank rose with a tacky sigh, and the attic smell changed. Oil, old paper, and the faint almond ghost of lab ink. A bundle lay in oilcloth, twine fuzzed but firm. Oilcloth was a Mary habit. Keep what matters dry. Storms don't book time. Mike let his hands hover because opening anything of hers felt like setting a bone. Pain now, function later. He cut the twine, unrolled the cloth. On top lay her wheat gold scarf from a Denver winter. Knit a hair too tight where a new stitch had fought her patience. Fringe uneven in the way she'd called charming. Time had warmed it to amber. Buddy dipped his nose to the fringe, inhaled, and gave a soft question, whine without moving his eyes off Mike. Go on, Mike said. Buddy inhaled again and sneezed like a scent had tickled. Mike lifted the fringe to his own face, faint but clear. Archival ink's clean, almond-adjacent breath. Months before she died, Mary had been consulting on mine records and playing scent games to keep Buddy sharp. She'd rubbed a whisper of test ink into the scarf's fringe so the dog could anchor a smell no one else would look for. Under the scarf lay 2 rubber-banded stacks and a heavier fold. The top page began the way she wrote when she wanted him steady. Hey you! Her script was teacher neat. Pressure told its own weather. Darker strokes where feeling leaned. Hey you, if you're reading this, you didn't leave first. That's the joke I never told, because I never wanted a world where you weren't there to hear it. If you're reading this, time did what it does, and the things I meant to say got too heavy to carry upstairs. I'm sorry. There's a practical part, I promise. But let me spend a handful of words to say that loving you has been the useful thing my life did. Mike sat back on a joist, knees refusing orders, and read it twice. The first like cold surf, the second like oxygen. Buddy leaned shoulder to thigh and held. The practical part came clean. Mary had seen numbers itch. Quarterly summaries showing safety gear paid and delivered. Weekly warehouse logs light or missing the same items. Inspections signed on Fridays like clockwork even when site visits drifted to Monday. 2 clinic notes months apart repeating a paragraph as if pasted. You can't prove a lie with air. You can prove it with paper paths. Margins turned into maps, arrows from purchase order to bank line to intake weight. PO 1847, masks. Vendor back ordered. Bank shows MISC safety, paid 03 Fustine, PO 212, harnesses. Receive stamp without matching weight. 3 tiny blue dots bled the page where a pen paused. Mike held the scarf up to the window. 3 blue knots hid in the hem, 1 near a corner, 1 centered, 1 near the far edge. Not decoration. A code you could wear. The heavier fold opened to a neat hand-drawn map on linen weight paper. Mary's father had been a civil engineer. She'd learned clean lines that hold weight. The ridge ran left to right. Widow's Gap cut a keyhole in stone. A deer path climbed to a rock shelf labeled cabin. Near the Eagle Overlook, where Mike had once gone to both knees without meaning to, an X and 2 small words. Our place. He had not returned since the funeral, not for fear of the view, but for what his chest did when joy remembered itself. Now the Overlook was not a wound. It was a step. She had kept her fairness even in the margins. Dr. Vernon Cross, 60-ish, tall and narrow, silver hair combed back. A clinician's calm that read his distance. Signed quickly because his waiting room never emptied. Verify with records, not hunch. Mike felt the familiar flare at the name on her death certificate and then the restraint she was teaching on the page. Paper, not blame. A name in the second stack bent the air easier. Tobias Toby Quinn. Early 50s, compact and raw-boned, sun-browned as if the outdoors had custody. Pepper gray under a sweat-dark Stetson. Straight mustache giving his face a courteous skepticism. Years back, Toby had shared night shifts with Mike on mountain rescue. On the side, he handled industrial supply, chain of custody and invoices, the dull rails that keep big machines honest. A logging accident in his 20s had killed his younger brother. The company's shrug had burned a simple ethic into him. No corners cut with other people's bones. Toby will keep his mouth shut until it's time to open it, Mary wrote. He'll watch my back without asking me to stop. Mike repacked with field kit care. The map slid into his zip pouch. The scarf folded into his jacket pocket, its small weight arguing for staying. At the stair window, he watched the rain silver the pasture and pencil the road. The ridge wore its hood of cloud. For 5 years, grief had been tied. Now, almost invisibly, it became current, still strong, but steerable. Downstairs, the cedar chest gave him what future Mike would need. A white index card in Mary's tidy hand, emergency contact, Tobias Quinn, number and email underlined once in firm blue. She underlined needs the way she used to leave casseroles, placed exactly, no speech attached. On the table he laid the oilcloth bundle, the map, the scarf. Buddy sat, set one paw gently on Mike's boot, and waited for the next verb. We're not leaving yet, Mike said. Saying it made it true enough to breathe. We go up, we go careful. Before that, we call Toby. Buddy's ears tipped, his tail thumped once, counting the first step. Mike glanced at our place on the map, felt the undertow loosen, and dialed. The morning hung cold over Ridgewood Ridge, gray clouds drifting low across the pines. Mist coiled in the valleys where sunlight hadn't yet reached. Mike parked his old Chevy near the gravel's end, the truck ticking softly as it cooled. Beside him, Buddy stood tall, 8 years old, sable coat brushed by fog, ears forward, tail calm. His breath rose in slow puffs, the rhythm of an animal who knew how to wait. Mike checked the map again, Mary's hand-drawn lines from the oilcloth bundle. Our place, she'd written near the sketch of an eagle overlook, the same place he'd once knelt with a ring in his pocket and a heart too full to speak. He started walking. The trail wound through thin birch and pine, the earth soft with needles and yesterday's rain. Buddy trotted ahead, nose low, tail steady. The dog's patience reminded him of the days after Mary's death. How Buddy had sat by the door each evening, listening for footsteps that would never come. Wind whistled through the rocks as the trail narrowed. The overlook opened wide, stone smoothed by years of wind and snow. Mike knelt where he once had, tracing the old carving in the rock. An eagle's wing, 3 feathers spread. He'd cut it with his knife the day she said yes. Then something caught the light. 3 faint blue dots inside the carving, visible only where the rock was damp. They gleamed like ink that refused to fade. "You left me breadcrumbs, didn't you?" he murmured. Buddy sniffed near a crack in the stone, his tail flicking once. Mike crouched beside him. The seam looked natural until he noticed the faint outline of something cylindrical lodged between the slabs. With a careful twist of his pocket knife, he loosened it. A black polymer tube slid out, sealed tight with an O-ring and dusted gray with age. Inside, wrapped in glassine and mylar, were papers, dry, perfectly preserved. Mary's handwriting covered the top page. Shift rotations, Silver Ridge Mine. Mike's throat tightened. Each column listed workers, equipment, return dates. But triangles marked missing items. Masks and harnesses labeled paid, but never logged. She'd written in the margins, paid for, never issued. He flipped another sheet. Fridays were circled again and again, inspection sign-offs that didn't match the real logs on Monday. Beneath one line, Mary's note read, "Rubber stamps don't stop cave-ins." Buddy gave a quiet whine, ears shifting toward the woods. "Easy," Mike said. He scanned faster. Bank records, vendor invoices, all showing payments to a safety supply company that no one in Ridgewood had ever heard of. A smaller note fell loose, Mary's handwriting, but hurried this time. "If delivered is only ink. Someone took breath from men who needed it." At the bottom, W.C.O. Mike pressed his palm to the scarf in his pocket, feeling the knots beneath the weave. "Wing cabin overlook," he whispered. "That's you, isn't it, Mare? Step by step." He photographed every page, slipped them back into the tube, and sealed it again. "Good work, boy," he said softly. Buddy wagged once and lay down, eyes following his hands. The wind changed. Buddy's ears turned toward the ridge trail. Someone coming. Mike straightened as a figure stepped out from behind a wet pine, boots crunching softly on gravel. A ranger. She was tall and straight-backed, maybe late 30s, with auburn hair braided down her shoulder. Freckles crossed her nose like dusted sunlight. Her jacket bore a Forest Service patch that read, "S. Whitaker." "Morning," she said, keeping her tone even, friendly but formal. "Trail check. We had a washout last week." Buddy watched her with professional calm, tail giving a single thump. She smiled at him. "He's a handsome boy." "Thanks," Mike said. "He's 8, used to be search and rescue." "Explains the posture," she said, kneeling briefly to meet Buddy's eyes. "I'm Sarah. You local?" "Mike Johnson," Ridgewood sighed. She nodded. "Be careful on the slope below. It's slick where the runoff hits the shale." Then, more gently, "You looking for something specific?" He paused. Just a place my wife used to love. Sarah's eyes softened. Mary Johnson? I knew her. She volunteered with the school kids for trail cleanups. Smart woman, quiet but sharp. Mike swallowed. Yeah, that was her. Well, she said, stepping back, if you need a second pair of eyes up here, I'm around till Friday. I take decent notes. Appreciate it, he said. She smiled once, professional again, and disappeared up the trail. Buddy's gaze followed her until the mist swallowed her outline. Mike turned back to the ridge. The valley below was washed in silver light now, clouds lifting just enough to show the rooftops of Ridgewood in the distance. He slid the tube into a plastic bin, laid Mary's scarf over it like a flag, and took a picture for evidence. Then he texted Toby, found cash at Eagle Wing, shift logs, plus paid invoices don't match. Note says, don't let the truth lie in the mist. The reply came fast. Label O. Keep sealed. ETA 2 hours. No talk till I'm there. Mike stared at the phone for a long moment, then slipped it into his jacket. Buddy rested his chin on the bin and sighed, a low sound that carried both trust and fatigue. We're not done, Mike said quietly, but we're closer. The ridge wind shifted, brushing the fringe of Mary's scarf against his hand. It felt almost like a nod. He started the truck, and together they headed down the mountain, one man, one dog, chasing the trail a woman had left in love and ink. The road to the cliffside cabin was little more than a pair of wheel tracks swallowed by grass and time. Wind moved through the firs in long sighs, and clouds hung low enough to graze the ridge. When the truck stopped, dust lifted softly and vanished into mist. Mike stepped out, pulling his collar against the chill. Buddy jumped down beside him, stretching once before looking toward the narrow footpath that wound upward through brush and fallen needles. 5 years had passed since anyone had touched this place. The cabin appeared slowly, half hidden behind elder trees, its planks silvered by rain and sun. The small porch sagged on one corner. A rusted lantern still hung by the door, its glass fogged and streaked. Inside, the air was cool and stale, filled with the faint sweetness of dusted pine. Every surface carried memory. A scarf folded on the armchair, faded to pale amber. A desk covered in thin film of dust, but still smelling faintly of oil and paper. Mary's handwriting lingered on labels, on the rim of a jar of nails, on a box marked field notes. Mike paused in the doorway, feeling the years he hadn't lived here. The silence was thick, but not cruel, more like a room waiting to resume a story. He walked in, boots careful on warped boards. Buddy followed, sniffing the air, tail moving in slow arcs. The dog's presence steadied him. The quiet between them had always been fluent. He touched the scarf on the chair, the same one Mary had worn every winter, its once soft wool now stiff with time. The oil lamp beside it had rusted where the handle joined the glass, and a line of dead moths slept inside the chimney. On the wall hung a frame map of Silvercrest County with small pencil marks radiating from the mines east of town. Each mark had been circled twice. Buddy nosed around the room, pausing at the corner of the bed. The dog's claws scratched lightly against the wood floor before he pawed once under the frame. A hollow thump answered. Mike crouched beside him. "What have you got, boy?" The German shepherd lowered his head, breathing quick and deep, then stepped aside as Mike lifted the mattress. Dust spiraled up. Under the frame, taped to a slat, was a worn leather notebook bound with string. Mike cut the tape carefully and opened it. Mary's handwriting again, still firm, though the ink had bled slightly from humidity. The first page listed inspection failures, sequence 1, followed by names, dates, and equipment codes. Margins held short notes in her small, precise script. Filters reused, warning ignored, forms unsigned. In another section, she had drawn a triangle with 3 numbered points and the phrase, insurance-proof sites, beneath it. Each coordinate referenced a storage or test site near Silver Crest. Next to one, she had added a faint check mark in blue ink. The other two remained blank. Mike turned pages carefully, reading pieces of a life he had only half understood. She had been investigating safety, discrepancies before the accident. But why keep it secret from him? Buddy pressed his nose against his arm, grounding him back in the room. "We're following her trail, just like she wanted," he said softly. He moved to the desk. A set of pens lay arranged as though someone had meant to return. Beside them, a single envelope marked emergency contact rested in a drawer barely ajar. The paper was yellowed, the edges curled. Inside lay a small card printed with the name Tobias Quinn, and a number beneath it, the same friend Mike had called from the Ridge, a former Army mechanic turned private inspector. On the back of the card, Mary had written in blue pencil, "If anything happens, trust him. He knows the paperwork." Mike sat down slowly, elbows on knees. The cabin's clock had stopped at 3:42, the hands corroded into stillness. For a moment he imagined her here, sorting forms, biting the end of her pencil, humming under her breath when numbers matched. He remembered how she used to line up receipts by color because patterns calmed her thoughts. Buddy padded over to the small stove where a few cold logs still sat. The dog's claws clicked once on metal, and something rattled beneath. Mike pried open the ash drawer. Inside, wrapped in tin foil, were several microfilm rolls labeled Safety Deposit, Silver Crest Co-op. He smiled despite the ache. "You really didn't make it easy, did you, Mayor?" Outside, tires crunched on gravel. Mike straightened quickly. Buddy's head lifted, ears sharp but not alarmed. Through the cabin window, he saw Toby's truck approach, a dusty blue pickup, older than either of them, engine coughing before it settled. Toby stepped out, tall but slightly stooped from an old back injury. His beard was trimmed close to the jawline, streaked gray over brown. The lines around his eyes were more fatigue than age. He wore a canvas jacket and carried a small camera bag over one shoulder. "Place looks like time forgot it," he said, stepping inside. His voice still had the gravel rasp of too many years in engine bays. "She used to come up here weekends, didn't she?" Mike nodded. "Kept notes, hid things." He handed him the notebook. Toby flipped a few pages, eyes narrowing as he read. "She was right," he murmured. "I remember this contract. Silver Crest claimed to upgrade safety gear after the 2015 collapse, but the shipments never matched their invoices." He looked up. If she found the proof, someone knew. The two men worked quietly. Toby photographed every page under the oil lamp's dull light, noting the angles, labeling the microfilm rolls. He moved with precision, careful hands, measured breathing, the habits of a man who had once learned to disarm things that could explode if rushed. "You ever think about leaving this behind?" Toby asked after a while. 5 years, that's all I tried to do," Mike said. "Didn't work." He ran a hand through his short, dark Sasta hair, silver glinting at the temples. Buddy kept waiting at the door every night, made it impossible to pretend life had moved on. The dog shifted closer to the chair, laying his head on Mike's boot as if agreeing. Toby smiled faintly. "That's loyalty money can't buy." Wind knocked against the windows once, then steadied. The room's quiet filled again with their breathing and the faint ticking of the cooling stove. Toby set down the camera. "You realize this makes her death look different. She was chasing missing funds, corporate fraud. That kind of digging doesn't go unnoticed." Mike's jaw tightened. "You think it wasn't an accident?" "I think she might have found the wrong page of the ledger." Toby's eyes flicked to the coordinates in the notebook. 3 insurance caches. If even one still exists, we can verify her claim. Mike folded the scarf on the chair and slipped it into his pack. "Then we start with the first coordinate." Buddy whined softly, tail sweeping the floor once, a sound halfway between readiness and warning. Mike looked down. "We'll take it slow, boy. No rush this time. As twilight settled, Toby stepped outside to photograph the cabin's exterior, leaving Mike inside with the documents. The light through the window turned the air gold around the dust motes. He looked at the desk one last time, the empty chair, the map on the wall, the stopped clock, and felt something loosen in his chest. The grief hadn't gone. It had simply changed shape. When Toby returned, he carried 2 mugs of coffee from a thermos, handing one over. "You ever notice," he said, "how she always used ink that never quite dried?" "She said it reminded her that nothing's finished," Mike replied. They drank in silence. Outside, Buddy sat on the porch, ears turning with the wind, guarding both the men and the paper trail of a woman who had refused to stop asking questions. Rain came softly that morning, a fine gray drizzle that blurred the ridge and turned every pine needle silver. Mike waited on the porch of the cabin, hands wrapped around a mug of coffee gone cold. Beside him, Buddy lay at his boots, chin resting on one paw, eyes fixed on the trail below. When the faint hum of an engine reached through the mist, the dog's ears lifted first, then his head. The sound steadied, grew distinct. Mike stood, setting his cup aside. Tobias Quinn's truck came into view. A weathered blue pickup dusted with road grit. It stopped just shy of the porch, engine idling once before dying to a rasp. Toby stepped out, tall and solid, shoulders broad under a faded canvas jacket. His beard, streaked with gray, outlined a face that had known both sun and discipline. His dark eyes carried the habit of scanning a scene before entering it, a leftover reflex from years as a field investigator. There was a stillness about him, not silence, but composure, as if every thought had already been weighed. "Got your call," he said, voice low, gravel worn. "Couldn't leave this sitting another hour." He reached into the cab and pulled out a leather satchel, then slung it over his shoulder. Buddy trotted down the steps to greet him, tail brushing the air. Toby bent, rubbing the dog's neck with a grin. "You still remember me, don't you, old soldier?" The shepherd huffed in reply, his amber eyes soft but alert. Inside the cabin, the smell of pine resin and old paper mingled. Toby set his satchel on the table and opened it. Inside were photographs, some printed, some Polaroids, along with a tin badge dulled by time. "Proof she wasn't working alone," he said. "Mary filed reports with me when the state inspectors went dark. They pushed her off the books to keep Silvercrest clean on paper." He tapped the badge. "We logged our findings through a third-party whistleblower channel, but the chain was cut before publication." Mike studied the photographs. In one, Mary stood near the mine's loading bay, hair tied back, clipboard in hand, expression calm but determined. Her eyes seemed to hold light even through the grain of the photo. She knew they were falsifying safety logs, Toby continued, and she wanted a record they couldn't erase. He pulled out another photo, 2 men in suits shaking hands in front of the Silvercrest emblem. These were the middlemen, contractors who signed off the fake gear deliveries. She got their signatures before the collapse. Buddy sniffed near the edge of the table, his nose brushing a crack between planks. He whined softly. Mike knelt, pried at the loose wood, and uncovered a thin envelope sealed with tape. Inside was a single sheet of paper, Mary's handwriting again, but this time written in blue ink instead of black. Across the top, a small dot of the same pigment she'd once used to mark her files. Her scent mark. "Buddy," Mike murmured, rubbing the dog's ear. "You've done it again." Toby leaned closer, reading the note aloud. "Cross-check pay orders with vendor withdrawals. Follow Friday discrepancies. Proof locked under initials AL." He frowned. "That's the clerk she mentioned in her notes, Arthur Leland, accounts officer, Silvercrest. He left town right after the accident, lives down in Mason Hollow now, runs a hardware storefront." Mike set the paper down carefully. "You think he'd talk?" "Depends," Toby said, folding the note into his notebook. "Some men sleep easy when the truth dies. Others wake every night with the noise of it in their ears. Buddy circled the room once, sniffing the corners, then lay by the hearth. Rain tapped at the roof, the sound gentle but persistent. Mike turned to the desk. She wrote about a chain of verification, the logs, the banks, the vendors. Maybe this was part of her system. Toby nodded. She called it the chain of truth. 3 links, cash flow, documentation, and witness. Each one has to hold, or the whole line breaks. He drew 3 circles on the dusted table with his finger. We already have the first, payment mismatches. The second's here, Mary's copies of the invoices. The third depends on people like Leland. Mike leaned back, rubbing the bridge of his nose. The ache in his chest wasn't just grief now, it was momentum. We'll need to prove it publicly, not through rumor. That's why I brought these. Toby opened another folder. Inside were notarized copies of their old joint reports, Mary's name beside his, her signature steady and clean. If the county office claims they never saw her documentation, we'll show them these. She sent duplicates through my channel before she died. The words hit heavier than expected. Mike's jaw clenched, but he nodded. She always planned 3 steps ahead. She trusted you to finish what she couldn't, Toby said quietly. Buddy gave a low rumble, almost a sigh, as if agreeing. He rose, paced toward the door, and pressed his nose to the crack beneath it. Mike followed, opened the door. The rain had stopped. Mist drifted along the valley like smoke. From here, the ridge stretched into folds of green and gray. You think the truth's still out there? Mike asked, half to the air. It's never gone, Toby said, stepping beside him. Just buried under paper. They loaded their evidence into waterproof folders, labeling each as Mary had, source A, B, C. Toby explained how to verify each record through the state database, how to match purchase dates with shipping manifests. Most of these companies change names, but their tax IDs stay the same. You find one consistent number between invoices and deposits, you've got them. As they worked, Buddy nosed at another drawer under the desk. A faint scratching sound followed, and a puff of dust rose. Mike knelt again and found a smaller envelope, stained with blue smudges. Inside lay a business card. Familiar handwriting along its edge. If something happens, follow the ink. Toby turned it over. A postal box address, no name. That's probably the holding address for her final drop. He met Mike's eyes. We'll trace it. Mike exhaled slowly, the air leaving him like relief and dread together. Then we start tomorrow. First light, Toby agreed. We'll visit Leland, then the bank. Buddy can come. People talk easier when a good dog's watching. Buddy wagged his tail once, as if sealing the plan. By nightfall, the rain returned, heavier this time. The 2 men worked by lantern, compiling photos, numbering pages, sealing envelopes. Mike's movements grew steadier with each label, each proof that Mary had left him a map, not of grief, but of duty. Toby said little. He'd learned that silence kept a man focused. When they finished, they sat by the cold stove, the scarf folded between them. She wrote that ink lasts longer than memory, Mike said quietly. Toby stared at the flickering lamp. Then, we'd better make sure both do. Outside, the ridge wind lifted again, carrying the scent of wet cedar through the cracks. Buddy stretched, yawning, then lay down between them, his tail curling across the floorboards. The flame trembled once and steadied, casting both men in a small, honest circle of light. Morning sunlight broke through low clouds, the kind of gold that clings to rain-soaked streets and makes even tired wood shine. Ridgewood's old church, with its peeling white boards and slanted bell tower, stood at the heart of the gathering. A hand-painted sign read, Public Record Day, Verification for All. Mike parked along the gravel lane, the hum of voices carrying across the small courtyard. Beside him, Buddy leapt out of the truck, tail high, trotting toward the steps with purpose. Inside, The wooden pews had been turned into makeshift desks. Folding tables lined the aisle, each bearing neat stacks of forms, stamp pads, and brass notaries' seals. It was an unusual sight. Neighbors who once whispered about the mine business now stood shoulder to shoulder, signing papers in quiet determination. The air smelled of ink, coffee, and sawdust from the repair work done just last night. Tobias Quinn stood near the altar, clipboard in hand, sleeves rolled up. The morning light caught the silver threads in his beard. He'd coordinated the event with the town council after convincing the mayor that transparency heals faster than rumor. "Keep it civil, keep it clear," he said to the volunteers. His voice carried the authority of someone who had lived both in command and consequence. Mike approached, Buddy padding beside him, carrying a satchel of marked folders in his teeth. It was a small touch Toby had suggested. People opened their doors faster to a man with a working dog than to a stranger with papers. Buddy wagged his tail and dropped the folders on a bench, then sat with soldierly patience. "Right on time," Toby said, flipping a page. "First layer, notarization. Town hall seal, citizen witness. Second, cross-verification, date, hour, lot number between company pay slips, county bank records, and supplier receipts. Third, sworn testimony." "And if all three align?" Mike asked. "Then we've got proof, not theory." Toby's eyes met his. "And Mary's work stands." The first few hours passed in the rhythm of small towns rediscovering order, paper rustling, pens scratching, the thunk of a stamp every few seconds. Sarah Whitaker, the ranger from Widow's Gap, had volunteered as an impartial observer. She moved through the aisles with a steady calm, tall and clean-lined in a forest green shirt. Her auburn braid tucked neatly into her collar. She spoke little, but made every signature process smoother, her precision disarming the skepticism of older miners. Her presence gave the event a quiet authority that no badge could buy. At the first table, Mrs. Carter, the postmistress, short and round with a soft, tired smile, handled notarization. "If it isn't signed here," she said, tapping her pen, "it doesn't breathe." People nodded and queued patiently. Mike and Toby worked at the cross-verification desk, comparing the safety equipment invoices against the county bank withdrawals. They'd drawn grids on large ledgers to visualize the data. Left column, date, center, transaction ID. Right, supplier confirmation. The pattern emerged almost too cleanly. Every Friday, identical sums withdrawn under emergency maintenance, each signed by the same initials, AL. At noon, Toby called for a break. The townsfolk stepped outside, chatting softly, sipping coffee under the awning. Mike stayed behind, leaning over the papers, while Buddy settled under the table. He double-checked the March ledger. "Look at this," he muttered as Toby returned. "The mask and rescue rope purchase, withdrawn March 3rd, approved by Silver Crest. But the supplier's ledger shows no delivery until April. Different invoice numbers entirely." Toby adjusted his glasses and scanned the sheet. "And that's the same weekend of the cave-in." A low whistle escaped him. "They faked delivery, filed reimbursement, never issued the gear. That's the missing link." Sarah approached with 2 signed affidavits. Leland's assistant just confirmed he signed blanks for overtime during those dates. Said he didn't read them. Orders from above. "From who?" Mike asked. "Supervisor Grant Hollis," she said. "He left Ridgewood last year. But I can request his forwarding address from the forestry registry. His property abuts state land." Toby smiled slightly. "That'd make you our unofficial liaison, Ranger Whitaker." "I just like things that line up," she said simply, handing over another sheet. Her handwriting was small and clear, the kind used by people who value precision. By late afternoon, the church had turned into a choreography of stamps and signatures. Every document went through 3 tables, each check initialed, each inconsistency circled in red. Mike watched the red marks multiply like small wounds across corporate printouts. The numbers told their own sermon. Thousands withdrawn, none of it seen by the miners who died without masks or harnesses. An elderly man approached their table, Mr. Delaney, the retired mine foreman. He was lean and wiry, with hands so calloused they seemed carved from wood. "I knew something stank," he said, signing his name with slow care. "Mary came by before the accident, asking about inventory counts. I told her the figures didn't match the boxes. Next week they shut my shift down." He looked at the papers spread before them. "You telling me she was right all along?" Mike met his eyes. "Yes, sir, she was." Delaney nodded once, his expression unreadable, but his voice thick. About time the truth got its own stamp. Buddy rose and padded toward the table where the ink stamps sat. He nudged one folder toward Mike, then pawed gently at a blue marker, as if insisting they keep going. The onlookers laughed softly. The dog's sense of timing eased the tension that had begun to weigh heavy in the room. By evening, the verification log was complete, 3 layers deep, triple signed, witnessed, and sealed. Sarah made the final entry in the record book, her neat handwriting steady even as the light dimmed. "This," she said, "is what community looks like." Toby stood by the doorway, watching as the last rays of sun filtered through the church's stained glass window. Dust danced in the gold air. "Mary would have liked this," he said quietly. "Proof that people still believe in fixing things properly." Mike folded his copy of the verified ledger, the one with the red circles and annotations. His fingers lingered over her initials, still faintly visible from the earlier photocopy. "She didn't just find the truth," he said. "She left it where others could reach it." Buddy barked once, sharp but content, as if seconding the thought. Outside, bells rang softly for the evening hour. The townsfolk gathered by the steps, some shaking hands, others simply standing together in silence. For the first time in years, Ridgewood didn't feel divided by the mine's shadow. It felt like a town reclaiming its breath. When the last document was boxed and sealed, Toby handed Mike a copy labeled Evidence Set 1, Ridgewood Verification. "We'll take it to the courthouse tomorrow," he said. "From here on, it's official." Mike nodded, feeling the kind of exhaustion that sits beneath relief. "She'd be proud," he murmured. Toby looked at him for a moment, then smiled faintly. "She'd tell you not to stop here." The two men stepped into the cool dusk, Buddy walking between them, tail sweeping the gravel. Behind them, the church bell tolled once more, a slow, steady note that carried down the valley and faded into the trees. A soft fog rolled in from the valley that morning, dulling the colors of Ridgewood's outskirts to muted steel and green. The road wound through scrub pine and the remnants of an old mining district, collapsed sheds, rusted conveyors, half-buried rails swallowed by weeds. Mike drove slowly, the tires crackling over gravel. Buddy leaned against the passenger door, his nose pressed to the half-open window, reading scents that belonged to a place history had already half forgotten. In the back seat, Tobias Quinn reviewed the coordinates again, his glasses perched low on his nose. "This is it," he said quietly. "Third storage site, Warehouse 9C. Silvercrest kept old maintenance logs there before shifting records downtown." The structure appeared beyond a patch of birch trees, a long, low building of corrugated tin and wood beams. Its once white paint turned gray with mold. The front door hung crooked, secured by a chain that had already rusted through. "Guess we're invited," Mike muttered, cutting the engine. Inside, the air was stale and cool, tinged with the smell of oil, dust, and something older, like paper and time. Light poured in through holes in the roof, stripes of pale gold cutting across stacked crates and rotted pallets. Buddy padded forward, nails clicking softly on the concrete floor. His head turned left, then right, then down. His tail gave a measured swing. He sniffed along the aisle, pausing by a wall of warped planks. Toby knelt near a desk whose drawers had fused shut from humidity. He was a patient man, built for methodical work. His beard caught flecks of light when he bent forward, eyes narrow behind wire frames. According to Mary's notes, he said, the maintenance shift log from 6 years ago should reference a repair call on the same day as the explosion. He brushed dust from a ledger. The date read March 4th. Under maintenance, someone had written in cramped capitals, "Safety check completed, no issues." Beside it, a different pen added the word verified in sloppy loops. That word wasn't hers, Toby murmured. Different ink, different hand. Buddy gave a short bark, sharp and insistent. Mike turned. The dog stood near the far corner, paw pressed to a warped section of flooring. His nose dipped, then pulled back, sneezing once at the faint chemical scent. Mike crouched beside him, pressing his hand to the wood. "What do you smell, boy?" The dog whined softly and pawed again. When Mike pried up a loose board, the air shifted. Faint traces of linseed oil and old printer ink. Beneath the plank lay a small metal compartment lined with wax paper. Inside were 3 documents sealed in plastic sleeves, edges curled with age. Mike lifted them carefully. The first was a material receipt, photocopied on the company letterhead, but stamped with a seal that looked wrong, its font slightly thinner than the current one. Toby held it to the light. "Forgery," he said. "They used an old template. This isn't the stamped silver crest used after 2015. The second document was a bank withdrawal slip for the same date as the supposed equipment purchase. Large sum, same memo, respirator and safety rope order. But the cross-check column for bill of lading was blank. No shipping confirmation, no delivery, Mike said. The third was more personal, an email printed on thin paper, header faded, from G. Hollis, a silvercrest.co.us, to A. Lilandu, actdept, skmine.us. The subject line read, Audit Week. The text was short, typed in a hurry. Keep the paperwork quiet until after review. Adjust logs if needed. We'll cover you once things settle. G. H. At the bottom, a handwritten note in blue ink, clearly Mary's. Proof of silence, was proof of cause. Toby exhaled through his nose, the sound heavy. That's it. Payment authorized, no shipment received, supervisor email confirming cover-up. Everything Mary hinted at. Mike felt a mix of vindication and dread. She found this and paid for it with her life, he said softly. Buddy pressed closer to his leg, warm and steady. They spent the next hour documenting every inch of the find. Toby photographed the false seal and printed email, recording metadata tags on his field tablet. Chain of custody starts here, he said. We'll store the originals in the insulated case. I'll duplicate to encrypted drive once we're back. A car engine rumbled outside. Mike stiffened instinctively, hand lowering toward Buddy's collar. The dog stayed silent, but watchful. Through the slats of the doorway came the sound of footsteps, measured, firm. A woman appeared, stepping through the sunlight pooling across the threshold. She was in her early 50s, tall, composed, with silver-streaked black hair tied neatly behind her head. Her gray suit was plain, but carried quiet authority. "Gentlemen," she said, "I assume you're Tobias Quinn." Toby rose. "Agent Grady, I presume." She nodded. "Elizabeth Grady, Federal Mining Inspection Bureau. Your message came through the oversight portal this morning. We've been expecting these findings." Her presence altered the room, disciplined, not cold. Years of field work had taught her to speak softly and be obeyed anyway. Her eyes were the color of tarnished brass, sharp but not unkind. "I brought 2 archivists and a forensic tech," she continued, gesturing to the door where 2 younger aides waited. One carrying a portable scanner, the other a sealed evidence case. "We'll establish custody here before anything leaves the premises." Toby motioned to the open hatch in the floor. "Documents are genuine, preserved dry. We've logged photo proof and coordinates." Grady crouched by the compartment, gloved hands moving with careful precision. She inspected each item, her expression unreadable. These receipts, different seal pattern, you're right. I cross-reference. Everything tonight. You gentlemen just made a lot of people nervous in nice offices. Mike looked toward the ridge through a cracked window. The fog had lifted, revealing the valley's green floor. They should be nervous, he said. Grady straightened, holding the email between her fingers. You know what this means? If this thread holds, Silvercrest funneled public safety funds through private accounts, left crews unprotected, and wrote it off as supply shortages. That's federal fraud and manslaughter negligence. Toby nodded grimly. We just wanted Mary's notes to mean something. They already do, Grady said. Her tone softened a shade. People like her remind us why oversight exists. I'll file for protective custody on these records before noon. No one touches them until we verify chain integrity. Buddy walked over, sniffing at her shoes, tail wagging once. Grady smiled faintly and crouched to scratch behind his ears. Good nose, she said. You're the one who found the ink, aren't you? The dog leaned in, soaking up the attention with quiet pride. As the agents began cataloging, Toby filled out the custody transfer forms. Mike helped box the items, labeling each with location, date, and finder. The process was long but exact, every movement documented, every envelope sealed under double initials. Grady oversaw each step, methodical but efficient, her background in engineering evident in the way she handled evidence like precision tools. When they finished, she gathered them near the open door. From here, I'll escort the material to the district evidence vault in Helena, she said. You'll both receive official copies and acknowledgement in the report. But you should know, this isn't over. The Bureau will dig deeper into who authorized these withdrawals. People will come asking questions. Mike nodded, calm but resolute. They can ask. Grady looked at him for a long moment. I read Mary's case file. She was one of ours once. Consulting analyst, unpaid but determined. You're doing right by her. The compliment hit quietly, somewhere behind the ribs. Mike looked at the dog, then back at her. We're just following her map. Grady's lips curved slightly. Then keep going. By late afternoon, the sun broke through, scattering gold across the tin roof. As the federal team packed up, Buddy sat at the edge of the loading dock, watching the light. The wind carried the faint scent of oil and pine resin, the ghost of the work that had ended lives and now, maybe, was being put right. When the last truck door shut, Grady turned once more toward them. You'll be contacted for deposition. Until then, keep each other safe. Toby lifted a hand in salute. We've done that before. As the convoy rolled down the road, Mike stood beside the old warehouse, the empty landscape stretching quiet and endless ahead. Buddy leaned into his leg, eyes half closed. She's still leading us, you know, Mike said. Toby nodded, sliding his hands into his coat pockets. Yeah. Only difference is, now the world's finally listening. Morning arrived pale and windless over Ridgewood. The courthouse windows reflected thin stripes of sunlight, and the smell of paper, ink, and lemon polish hung in the hall. Elizabeth Grady moved through the corridor with her usual precision. Tall, lean, dark hair streaked with silver. Her gray suit immaculate despite the dust of travel. She carried the case that held the recovered documents from the old warehouse, every sheet sealed and labeled. Beside her, Mike Johnson walked quietly, the lines around his mouth deeper than last week, but steadier. Buddy padded between them, nails ticking softly against the tiles, tail moving in slow rhythm. Inside the records room, 3 desks had been arranged beneath the ceiling fans. Behind the first sat Helen McCready, the county clerk, a meticulous woman in her early 60s with neat silver curls and the posture of someone born to straighten chaos. Her spectacles hung from a golden chain, and her eyes shone with calm intelligence. Agent Grady, she said, I've laid out the original ledgers and their duplicates. The pages from Silver Ridge are exactly as they were stored in 2016. The second desk belonged to Darius Cole, the local bank manager. He was in his 40s, tall, composed, the kind of man whose tie always aligned perfectly with his belt buckle. His short black hair was beginning to gray at the temples, giving him an air of restrained gravity. "I brought the withdrawal slips," he said, "every transaction tagged to the company's safety budget. They don't match any incoming invoices." At the third desk stood Nina Park, logistics director for Rocky Mountain Industrial. Slender, sharp-eyed, with an engineer's confidence, she carried a stack of shipping records under one arm. "No trucks, no bills of lading, no scanned barcodes," she said briskly. "Those orders never moved." Grady nodded once. "Let's begin." For hours, the group compared documents, signatures, ink hues, stamps, and serial numbers. Buddy lay quietly near the door, head on his paws, watching as if he understood the rhythm of justice in progress. Every so often, he lifted his head and looked toward Mike, who sometimes paused to rest his hand on the dog's shoulder, a silent exchange of steadiness. As the sun climbed higher, the evidence aligned like rails coming to a junction. Withdrawals every Friday, identical amounts, missing transport logs, stamps with outdated seals. Helen frowned as she flipped another ledger page. "The paperwork's a forgery," she murmured, "but a lazy one." Grady adjusted her glasses. "Lazy people don't bury evidence under oil and linseed," she said. "They had help, someone smart enough to fake the surface, but too arrogant to think anyone would check." By noon, the conclusion was undeniable. Funds had been drawn for safety gear that was never purchased. Mike leaned back, exhaling slowly. "Mary had all this," he said quietly, "and no one listened." "Now they will," Grady replied, "because the law listens when paper speaks." The next morning, a letter from Washington confirmed what they already knew. The Bureau of Mining and Safety had opened a dual investigation, one civil, one for criminal negligence. Grady's tone over the phone was professional but measured. "They're calling it systemic malpractice. Silver Ridge Mining is being forced to cooperate." 2 days later, a convoy of black cars arrived at the courthouse. Randall Pierce, the company's lawyer, stepped out first. 50, tanned, expensive suit, the smile of a man trained to disguise retreat as diplomacy. "We're here to resolve this," he announced. Grady met him in the conference room. Her calm was almost clinical. "You will acknowledge corporate liability, commit to a restitution fund, and issue a public apology. You will also fund a permanent safety program overseen by the state." Pierce's jaw tightened. "That's an ambitious list." "It's shorter than the list of names on the memorial wall," she replied. Silence settled. Even Pierce couldn't argue with that. By the end of the day, the company signed the preliminary settlement, an admission of wrongdoing, compensation to the victims' families, and the establishment of a safety renewal fund for the Ridgewood region. The state would monitor it. Grady would supervise the initial rollout. That evening, Mike drove Buddy back toward the ridge, where the air smelled of pine and rain. Grady sat in the passenger seat, coat folded neatly across her lap. "Your wife's maps mention 3 caches," she said. "We've verified 2. There might still be one more. W could stand for wing or west." They stopped where the road curved toward Widow's Gap. The cliffs glowed orange in the setting sun. Buddy jumped down first, nose twitching, tail stiff with focus. He trotted along the ridge until he reached a mound of stones stacked in a neat cairn. He sniffed, then pawed once. Sharp, certain. Mike knelt beside him and brushed the dirt aside. Beneath the stones was a small metal cylinder sealed with wax. Inside lay a folded page, yellowed but dry. Mary's handwriting, tight and graceful. Final verification, deposit affidavit with Pastor Ruiz, seal intact. At the bottom, in her familiar blue ink, 3 small letters, WCO. Grady smiled faintly. "Wing, cabin, overlook," she murmured. She left her own compass. The next day they visited Pastor Abel Ruiz, a man in his 50s with kind eyes and a deep, quiet voice. He still tended the little wooden church where Mary had once taught Sunday reading. He remembered her bringing him a sealed envelope years ago. She said, "If something happens to me, keep this safe until truth comes knocking." Inside the envelope was a notarized affidavit, a full list of missing purchase orders written in Mary's oar, hand and stamped by the county seal. It was the final link Grady needed. "This closes it," she said softly. "The chain of evidence is whole." A week later, the state issued its official ruling. Silver Ridge Mining, Corainst, guilty of negligence and fraud, ordered to compensate victims' families and establish an independent safety training initiative. The announcement was made in the churchyard under a clear morning sky. Grady stood near the podium, flanked by local reporters. Beside her were Mike and Buddy, both silent but resolute. The governor's delegate read from the decree, concluding with, "In recognition of his assistance and integrity, Mr. Michael Johnson is appointed Community Safety Advisor for Ridgewood and awarded the State Citizen's Distinction for Service." Applause rippled through the crowd. Mike looked down at Buddy, whose ears perked as if he understood the words. "Guess we're on the payroll now," he said quietly. The dog barked once, proud, content. That evening, after the crowd had gone and the sun bled red across the mountains, Mike walked to the overlook, where he had once proposed to Mary. He placed her old scarf on the rock and watched it flutter in the warm wind. "We did it," he whispered, "the right way." Buddy lay beside him, head resting on his paws, eyes reflecting the fading light. The valley below, once shadowed by grief, glowed gold again, not loud, not triumphant, just right. The evening light washed over Ridgewood in tones of honey and rust, soft and forgiving. From the ridge, the valley looked smaller than it once had, as if grief itself had drawn tighter circles and then loosened them again. The old cabin stood there on the cliffside, its timber weathered but sturdy, new shingles glinting faintly from the repair work done by volunteers the week before. A new wind chime hung by the porch, brass and glass, a gift from Sarah Whitaker, the ranger, who said every town needed a sound that remembered and forgave. It swayed now in the evening wind, whispering faint, hollow music. Mike Johnson sat on the porch steps with Buddy beside him, their silhouettes bathed in gold. The German shepherd, older now, had grayed a little around the muzzle. His amber eyes caught the dying sun like two small lanterns. Mike ran a hand through the dog's fur, feeling the steady heartbeat beneath. "You remember when we first came back here?" he murmured. Buddy's tail thumped once. "Didn't think we'd still be here, huh?" Down in town, people were gathering near the church. Strings of paper lanterns hung across Main Street, glowing one by one as dusk settled. The smell of pine smoke and baked bread drifted up the hill. It was the first memorial lighting ceremony, a new tradition to honor those lost in the mine disaster and to celebrate the town's renewal. The bells of the church rang slow and clear. When Mike and Buddy arrived, Toby Quinn was already there, his beard trimmed shorter now, wearing a clean jacket that didn't quite fit his shoulders, a man trying to relearn comfort. Beside him stood Grady, still in her work suit, though she'd left her badge in her pocket, her face softened by lamplight instead of fluorescent glare. Around them, families carried candles and framed photos. Some children had painted rocks with names. Others had written small notes tied to the lantern strings. Sarah Whitaker, tall and steady, was directing people toward the steps. Her auburn braid shimmered when she turned her head. She had traded her ranger uniform for a simple sweater, and for once she wasn't giving instructions, only smiles. "Mike," she said, her voice low but warm, "you did something good. The town feels different now." "Mary did it," he replied. "We just caught up to her." Sarah looked toward the crowd, then back at him. "She'd be proud you stayed long enough to see it happen." The ceremony began. Pastor Abel Ruiz stepped forward, his baritone rolling gently over the gathering. "We light these lanterns not for loss," he said, "but for the courage that carries on, for truth brought into the light, for every life made safer because someone refused to turn away." He nodded toward Grady, then to Mike. The crowd followed his gaze. A few clapped, others simply bowed their heads. Grady leaned over and whispered, "The settlement papers were finalized today. Silver Ridge Mining has signed everything. Restitution, training fund, the apology letter. The checks will go out by next week." Mike nodded, though the weight of it felt unreal. For years he had lived beneath shadows of grief, guilt, silence, and now the sun had returned almost too suddenly. He looked at Buddy, sitting still at his side, ears twitching in the breeze. "We did it, boy. You, me, and her." When the first lanterns lifted, the crowd let out a collective breath. The sky filled with slow-moving orbs of gold drifting upward, carrying wishes and names into the gathering night. The reflections shimmered in Buddy's eyes. He barked once, softly, as if calling after them. Later, the group gathered around a small bonfire by the riverbank. Children toasted marshmallows while elders talked in low voices about old times and new plans. Toby was showing a teenager how to tie a proper rescue knot, explaining it like a man who had found purpose again. Sarah walked down the bank with 2 mugs of coffee, handing one to Mike. "He's turning into the town's teacher," she said. "That's good," Mike replied, sipping carefully. "Every town needs one." "And what about you?" she asked. He smiled faintly. "Apparently, I'm the new community safety advisor, still figuring out what that means." Sarah tilted her head. "It means they trust you. Maybe it's time you trust the place back." He didn't answer at once. The wind moved gently through the pines, carrying the sound of laughter and distant chimes. Buddy nudged his hand, demanding one last scratch behind the ears. "We'll stay," Mike said finally. "We'll stay and make sure no one forgets." The next morning, the sun rose over Ridgewood, as if washing the town clean. New safety signs stood at the rebuilt mine entrance, fresh paint, sturdy steel. The training center's doors gleamed with a plaque, "In memory of those who built and believed, dedicated to Mary Johnson and the workers of Silver Ridge." Beneath it, smaller letters read, "Truth endures." Grady was leaving that day, heading back to Helena for new assignments. She met Mike and Toby at the cafe for breakfast. She looked lighter, almost casual, her jacket open, her badge tucked away. "You know," she said, "most cases end with paperwork, not many end with peace." "Guess we got lucky," Toby said, stirring his coffee. "No," Grady replied. "You got honest." She shook Mike's hand, firm, steady, a gesture of equals. "Keep them safe, Mr. Johnson. That's what she'd want." Buddy barked, a deep single note. Grady smiled. "And you, soldier, keep him out of trouble." After she drove away, Toby looked at Mike. "What now?" Mike gazed toward the ridge where the cabin's roof glimmered faintly between the trees. "Now we live," he said simply. That evening, as the sky turned lavender, he climbed the ridge again. The cabin smelled faintly of cedar and old paper. On the table lay Mary's scarf and the small box that once held her letters. He opened it, not to read, just to remember. Buddy settled at his feet, sighing contentedly. Outside, the new wind chime rang with the soft touch of night air. Mike stepped onto the porch, watching as the town's lights flickered on below, steady, unhurried. The sound of the church bell carried faintly across the valley. He crouched beside Buddy, placing a hand on the dog's head. "We're staying, pal," he said quietly. "Not because we're stuck, because it's home again." Buddy placed one paw on his hand, a solemn, gentle press, a handshake between 2 survivors and between a man and the life he'd finally chosen to keep. Behind them, the last of the light bled across the ridge, and for the first time in years, Ridgewood's night didn't feel like an ending, but a promise. When the night deepened, the lights of Ridgewood shimmered below like a sea of quiet stars. The new wind chime by Mike's cabin sang its soft hymn into the darkness, a sound neither sad nor joyful, but grateful. In the months that followed, the mine reopened under new rules, the town rebuilt its school roof, and children played again in places once marked by silence. Buddy aged with grace, his muzzle silver, his steps slower but sure. Every dawn, he would still lead Mike down to the valley road, stopping to watch the sunrise paint the cliffs where Mary's scarf once waved. Sometimes, when the wind carried the scent of pine and rain, Mike felt something more than air, as if the world itself was breathing with him. Not all miracles arrive with thunder or light. Some come quietly, in the form of forgiveness, in the sound of a community laughing again, in a man learning that staying can be braver than running. Ridgewood had once been a place of tragedy. Now, it was living proof that faith, when joined with action, could turn wounds into seeds. And maybe that's what Mary had meant all along, that the truth doesn't just reveal what was wrong, it reveals what's still worth saving. If this story touched your heart, remember, miracles aren't always grand. Sometimes they're a neighbor showing up, a dog refusing to give up, a prayer whispered in the dark that becomes light for someone else. God still works through ordinary hands, yours, mine, ours, to rebuild what's been broken. May the Lord bless you and your loved ones with peace, courage, and kindness in every step you take. Share your thoughts in the comments below. What moment of faith has changed your life? Like this video, share it to inspire someone who needs hope today. And subscribe so together we can keep spreading light where the world has gone dim. Because sometimes the smallest act of faith can become someone else's miracle.